please. So I want to talk a bit about this. This is a relationship spectrum. Actually, I think we have handouts if you want to pass them around. I've got a handout of this. For those of you online, the Zoom file transfer system is not working for us right now, but I will get you all of these handouts in an email after the fact. So please enter your email address in that form at the end, and I'll send out a packet of all the handouts for you. And those of you in person, I handout already. Hey, welcome, come on in. So I want to talk about this relationship spectrum. This is from loveisrespect.org, which is an amazing resource, especially for intimate partner relationships and violence and things like that, and how to spot and deal with those kinds of things. But this type of information is very applicable for any relationships that we're talking about, not just intimate partner relationships, but familial relationships, friendship relationships, et cetera, right? But the primary focus of this, again, is intimate partner ones. And you'll notice that it's moving from healthy, unhealthy, and abusive, right? These are the three categories that we have, right? And so communication is, well, let me do respect first, because that's the first one that's on there. We know that a hallmark of a healthy relationship is respect, right? And when we talk about respect, that means valuing each other as you are, right? And so it comes in with boundaries a lot of time, respecting people's boundaries. People will say that, oh, like I'm bad with boundaries, or I need you to respect my boundaries, or something like that, right? That's a key portion of having a good partner relationship, right? And so on the one side, being very respectful of boundaries is great. On the opposite side, the more abusive end, right, you see more things like one or both partners directly disrespecting the feelings, the decisions, the opinions, even the physical safety of the other partner, right? And so sometimes when we're in a more abusive relationship like that, right, sometimes the only thing to do is terminate that relationship, try to find a safe way to extricate yourself from that relationship. And that can be very difficult, right? But that's a good time to talk more. If you find yourself in connecting with any of these abusive portions as we're going through them, that would be a great time to follow up with us at the counseling center and talk more with the counselor about that kind of thing, about your safety and about how we can help you work on a relationship like that. You know, today in this workshop, I want us to think a lot about this middle space of unhealthy relationships, because we find ourselves a lot of times in those unhealthy relationships, and they can either go worse, right, and turn slowly into a more abusive relationship, or hopefully with the right tools, with the right kinds of interventions, they can move towards a more healthy relationship, right? Or you can extricate yourself from them before they become unhealthy, right? And so the second piece is communication, right? So communication that is healthy, that is positive, right? Which is the thing everybody names when we talk about healthy relationships, has to be openly talking about problems and listening and respecting each other's opinions, not just talking to talk at each other, right? But actively respecting what the other person is saying, right? And so the opposite of that obviously is insulting, harmful, demeaning, verbally abusive behaviors, right? But in the middle there, the unhealthy behavior is oftentimes not communicating at all, right? Or communicating in ways that are passive aggressive or avoided, right? And so that's something to watch out for in terms of those, I guess you'd call them like orange flags, right? You know, relationships where we would need to find a way to deal with those before they get worse, right? It's a similar thing for trust, right? So trusting relationships, in a trusting relationship, you never have to, you know, or should hopefully never have to prove that trust, right? You shouldn't have to be like sharing your like every password to every single one of your social media accounts, email accounts, banking accounts, right? You shouldn't be having to share your location constantly with your partner, right? Because that's not really a trusting activity, right? Because you're not trusting, you're trying to prove, right? You know, and so the hallmark of a trusting relationship, a healthy relationship, is having the trust that doesn't need to be something that happens, and that we don't exhibit those bad boundaries and enmeshment, right? An abusive relationship is on the other side. It's very accusatory, right? It's very harmful in terms of the just pure lack of trust and the outright accusations that one or both partners are making towards each other. But what really lands in the middle there, what really, again, are orange flags, is that behavior like I was saying at the beginning, right? That, oh, I trust you because I have access to your phone and I go through your text messages or whatever, right? Like, oh, if you're not hiding anything, why don't you trust me to give you your password to this, that, or the other thing, right? Why isn't it okay that I, like look through all your stuff, right? This type of trust is actually a lack of trust, right? And leads so often to many, many difficulties, right? Especially it's not leading into a positive relationship very often, and B, can very quickly lead, if the relationship does become abusive, to making it very difficult to disengage from that relationship, right? If they can track your location, if they can, hack into your emails, if they, have access to all your banking information, things like that, right? Those cases, like, that can be very dangerous. And so something to think about. The same thing with honesty is the next piece. Honesty, obviously the dishonest, the abusive part is denying that abusive tactics or abusive things are occurring, right? You may have heard the term gaslighting before. This is basically like telling you, convincing you that literally something that you saw or experienced isn't real, right? And this is a very common hallmark of abusive relationships, right? But the opposite of that, like when we move into like healthier honesty, right? A healthier honesty, you think, okay, lying is bad, dishonesty is bad, so honesty is good. So only, telling every single thing to each other, having no possible secrets or private parts of our lives from our partner, that would be a good thing, right? But I want to try and argue that that's not actually the good thing here, right? Yes, question.
Oh, I'm confused. What is gaslighting again?
Yeah, okay, so gaslighting, definition of the term. Gaslighting is the idea that you tell somebody like, oh, that never happened. What are you talking about? When you say, oh, last week, you hit me or whatever, right? And you say, no, that didn't happen. What are you talking about? That never happened. Or you bailed on the whatever plans that we made with my family or whatever. No, you never told me about them. That was never a thing that we agreed on. Or I never promised I would do that, right? Even though you did, right? That's what we mean by the term gaslighting. It's the type of dishonesty where you're not just lying about something, you're lying with the intent to make the person that you're lying to doubt their memories, doubt their conception of reality, doubt what's actually real in their lives, right? And that's the most abusive form of dishonesty.
Why do they call it that?
They call it gaslighting. I don't exactly know why, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with like either like, yeah, you know what? I'm not gonna guess right now. I've heard before that it has to do with like both people said about the flickery nature of like gaslight and making weird illusions on walls. I've also heard that it's like a gas leak makes you like dizzy and disoriented. I don't really know if either of those things are true though. Like so. Somebody online know? Did somebody Google it for us?
I think it's from a movie or like a really old play. And then Callie said the term gaslighting originates in a British play film. In the 1930s, the play was called Gaslight, and the plot is about a husband who mentally and emotionally manipulates his wife into believing.
Okay, so apparently you read this in honors. Because like both Callie and Lana are telling me about it right now.
It's just like a lot of people were curious about it, so I wanted to start a conversation with different people, like gaslighting, because it kind of became a new thing recently.
Yeah.
I feel like I just like didn't know what it was, so then a lot of people just were curious about it. So yeah, I've heard of that before, just in conversation.
Great. We learned something together today, team. I love it. So gaslighting comes from apparently a very old literary source. I love it.
We also have a question. Why do one or the other partner gaslight, but at the same time try to back up the reason why they do it?
Okay, good question. So why would somebody try and justify gaslighting? I mean, why wouldn't you? right? Like, if you're already gonna be dishonest enough to try and gaslight somebody, what's adding on to it to say like, okay, I'm justified in doing this, right? Now I'm gonna that's almost a gaslighting in and of itself, right? To convince somebody that it's okay to lie to somebody, that's not true, right? So even then that's a form of gaslighting, right? So like the other thing is it's about power, right? The reason that people gaslight, the reason that a lot of these abusive styles of behavior happen is in order to isolate and control the other partner, right? That's what makes abusive relationships quite commonly, right? And so if you have some kind of unassailable position where it's okay to gaslight the other person, and then that means they can't object to you gaslighting them, then that means that they're going to be that much more easier to isolate and control, right? And so that's typically how an abusive cycle goes. The behavior patterns are intended to isolate and control. Yeah, Bella.
Like work related relationship, like friends or even like just in work related, like how would you deal with someone who is like, I don't even know, I guess they would gaslighting, but like who like really believes that they're not wrong, like every single time, like you bring up a topic and the response is no, I didn't do that, or I did do that, like every time, like even if there's like actual evidence of like the person doing this one thing, like they will go to the end like saying no, that's not what happened, like no, I got there on time, no, like like but every time like never admitting that they were wrong in a situation. Like how do you deal with someone in a work relationship like that way?
So that is a very good question. It's a very difficult question, right? So part of that, I'm going to save my answer to that for when we get onto assertions, just after I finish this, and then I go into communication styles. We're going to talk about assertive behavior, and that'll be useful there, right? And so my answer broadly is if somebody like can be reasoned with, you talk with them, you use basic assertive communication strategies and say, don't agree with them and say, no, here's the evidence, right? And at a certain extent, right, if it's maladaptive enough, it becomes like abusive of that relationship, right? And then like the manager needs to step in and like write that person up or whatever, right? But hopefully, like assertive communication that you can have with them can help if it's just an unhealthy dishonesty, move it towards a healthy honesty, rather like if it's too far gone, again, just like I said before, if we find ourselves in strongly abusive relationships, the only thing we can really do is try to get out of those relationships. And in a work relationship, you don't have that control, but hopefully your boss does, and can fire that person or help write them up and get them into a remediation plan that causes them to, I don't want them to lose their job, but I want them to stop doing that, right? So, yeah. Another question.
Yeah, I was gonna comment to what she was saying. My mom had a tenant like that. It was actually sad that it was a family member. He was staying at in my mom's one of her apartments, and he wasn't paying rent. And then he overstayed his welcome. He was being like that. Oh, you did this. No, I didn't. You did this. No, I didn't. So my mom ended up kicking him out.
Exactly. And sometimes that's the only thing that you can do.
It's like, hey, this is what's going on. You're leaving your dogs in there, and it's hot, and they're barking all day long, and the neighbors are complaining. Oh, they're not barking. Like everybody's complaining about your dog barking. No, they're not barking.
Yeah, you can't gaslight like at a certain point. Reality,
Get out of here.
Right? Yeah. And so another piece that goes along with this, as I was talking about, the reason for gaslighting is isolation and control, right? The next piece here is about where you spend your time, right? So a hallmark of an abusive relationship is it's isolative, right? The abusive partner attempts to isolate and control the abused partner, right? Whereas on the healthy side of things, you would think be like, oh, we spend all of our time together, right? And even that can be a reason why things head into an unhealthy way, right? Oftentimes especially if we're talking about romantic relationships, but even if we're talking about like a new best friend you made kind of thing, right? You might find yourself spending a lot of time with the person in this new relationship when it's exciting and interesting and good, right? And so we may think that's good, right? We may think that's a healthy thing to do. And to some extent, it is important to invest in our new relationships, right? But when we find ourselves only spending time with our partner, then that's an orange flag, right? And when we find one partner not letting you spend time with somebody else, that's a red flag, right? So really what the healthy form of spending time with each other actually looks like is the ability to be happy and excited about spending time together, but also having interests and relationships outside of the primary relationship, right? Yes, question?
I think it's healthy, because I've been in abusive relationships, so now I look for red flags early. Do you think that is healthy, or do you think you should give it more time? Like, for example, like I went out just on a second date with someone, and after the second date, they wanted to know where I was. Like, block. But okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is really about, for those of us who have history of abuse, right? How do we engage in relationships going forward, right? And so I would say that any red flags that you see in general, we should terminate that relationship, right? I need to know where you're at. No, you don't. So, but if we see more orange flags, right, then that's an opportunity where we can really be quickly and firmly assertively communicating. Again, I keep referring to assertive communication. I'm about to get there. I promise I'm not going to keep you in the dark on assertions too much longer. But quickly use that, and if we don't see change, then get out of that relationship quickly.
Or she could also do something like, "Where are you?" And she could say, I'm around the corner."
We have some chats on the Zoom here.
Asked earlier, how much does culture play in people's boundaries and trust?
Yeah, how much does culture play in people's boundaries for trust? Now, culturally, different types of boundaries will exist, right? That's gonna be very true. And so this information doesn't necessarily not hold in relationships within different cultural contexts as well, right? This will be a very common one you might think of in more authoritarian type family structures, right? Where parental involvement in your relationships is not going to be very respectful or trusting or happy for you to spend time with others, right? That can be a very common thing, right? And that's not necessarily bad if it's within the cultural context, right? But if it becomes more restrictive than is appropriate within that cultural mores, then you're still showing you're basically like moving the goalposts, right? You know, so like what might be an orange flag maybe is not really an orange flag. Maybe it's like kind of green, or maybe it's just something a kind of an orange flag that we live with, right? But we still can see red flags, and we can't make sure that culture just is an excuse for abuse, right? You know, because in every culture there's abusive relationships and there are healthy relationships, right? And so while the norms differ, right, where the set point is for some of these things, right, still there will be opportunities for abuse, and still we need to notice those and deal with them, right? So hopefully that answers the question that the person asked. Control is the next one on our list here. They got kind of cut off on the slides here. Control in a healthy relationship is equal versus control in a abusive relationship. The abusive partner controls the abused partner, right? And then when you find yourself in control struggles in a relationship, that's that orange flag, right? Why does people need to be in control, right? Why are we struggling for control? Why don't we have equal control over things, right? And then finally, in terms of sexual activity for intimate partner relationships, right? Mutual sexual choice making is the hallmark of healthy relationships, right? Whether that is, you know, choosing to engage in particular sexual behaviors or choosing not to engage in particular sexual behaviors. The emphasis is not on what the behavior is, but rather enthusiastic consent by both parties to whatever sexual behaviors you choose or choose not to engage in, right? The obvious opposite of that would be forced sexual behavior, sexual assault, right? And so that's sometimes we like to say is a pretty clear line, but even in sexual assault cases, a lot of times they fall into this middle category, this orange category of pressured sexual activity, right? Where somebody doesn't necessarily want to engage in something, but the partner pressures them into doing so, right? That's unhealthy and can very quickly lead to abusive, right? And so that's why it's important as we talk about sexual decision making, we talk about enthusiastic consent, right? Not just coerced consent. Okay. Any more questions or thoughts on the relationship spectrum stuff? I'm glad you guys are asking questions and engaging. Okay, give me my next slide. So what do we do about all this? I keep alluding to assertive communication as a strategy for trying to shift those unhealthy relationships towards healthy, right? Again, if we find ourselves in abusive relationships, it's time to terminate that relationship. If you need help with that, please come seek us at the counseling center. We'd be happy to help. But if you're trying to move from unhealthy to healthy, how do we do that? Now, we typically do that through assertive communication. But before I can really tell you assertive communication, I gotta kind of explain what I mean by aggressive, passive, and passive-aggressive communication as well, so you guys can kind of get the feel of it, right? So next slide, please. So the two major poles that you can imagine, like two ends of a spectrum, right, are passive communication and aggressive communication, right? So in a passive communication pattern, basically you sacrifice your needs, wants, desires for the needs, wants, desires of the other person that you're in communication with, right? And so you basically defer to them, let them control, let them make the decision, etc., right? Passive communication typically promotes peace, promotes harmony, makes it easy to get along with folks, avoids conflict, right? This can be especially in a high conflict relationship. Somebody might become very passive in order to try and avoid conflict or even to keep themselves safe if they're in an abusive relationship, right? Obviously, the con of passive communication is you don't get what you need, right? If you're constantly sacrificing your needs for the person that you're in communication with, you don't get what you need, right? The opposite, of course, if I come over here on my favorite, passive aggressive line, would be aggressive communication, right? The benefit of aggressive communication, of getting in somebody's face, of yelling at them, of threatening them, of demanding what you want, putting your needs ahead of everybody else's, is you win. You get your needs met, right? Somebody will be passive towards you, defer to you, and you get what you want, right? Except this is a very short-term kind of strategy, right? You're gonna lose friends, you're gonna end up isolated, right? If you're actually threatening people and carrying through on those threats, you end up in legal trouble, end up in jail, right? This is one of the reasons why in abusive relationships, an abuser takes so much time to isolate the victim, right? Because the target of the abuse then has no ability to flee that aggressive communication, right? Whereas in other spaces, when we do have the ability to choose, if somebody's constantly yelling at you and being aggressive towards you, just leave. You don't be their friend anymore, right? And that person no longer has, those relationships that, again, we all need. We're all created to be relational beings, right? And so in either case, aggression and passivity don't really work out, right? Next slide, please. So what typically tends to happen is that a lot of folks, and this can be culturally bound, and it can be bound by traditional cultural views of gender as well, right? Typically, there's higher instances of aggressive communication among cis male identified folks. Typically, there's more uses of passive communication styles among cis females, right? Within a Western context. Now, this isn't a universal rule, right? This is just a generalization, right? But either way, folks tend towards passivity, and you are passive enough, you shut down your needs enough, you defer to the other enough in order to get along, in order to keep friends, in order to make sure nobody gets mad at you, right? But you're just got this anger just building up inside of you, right? In the pit of your stomach, right? And the more and more you engage in passive behavior, eventually you just get so mad that you start yelling at somebody, right? Or, please do not, but you end up physically, violently lashing out at someone, right? That's the problem, is that the major reason for anger is basically blocked goal-directed behavior, right? So like, if you want something and you can't get it for long enough, you're gonna get really mad and you're gonna lash out in anger, right? And so you're gonna move from passive communication to aggressive communication, right? And so you see people blowing up a lot of times, right? And that's because of the poor communication strategies that have gotten us there, that passivity that's built up the anger, right? Instead of addressing things at the time. The other way that it might come out is passive aggressive communication. So passive aggressive communication is ways of confronting somebody and aggressing towards them without doing it directly, right? So little sneaky ways to get in your like criticisms of the other person, right? You know, I had my buddy's wife. She was we all went to college together, right? She had this terrible roommate situation I still can remember to this day, and their whole apartment was just covered in sticky notes. And they were all little sticky notes with like smiley faces on them and cute little stars or like, you know, happy faces. And it would be like, do your own dishes. These dishes have been here in the sink for, 3 minutes now. These need to be cleaned up. We agreed on a vacuuming schedule. Here's where the vacuuming is, Jessica, in case you forgot where it is. It's in this closet, this kind of thing. The whole apartment was covered with these passive aggressive notes. And it was like out of like a sitcom, like I swear, like it was so bad, right? But that's passive aggressive behavior, right? And passive aggressive behavior doesn't make it any better, right? We said that healthy relationships are communicative, right? I don't mean passive aggressive communication, right? I don't mean leaving little snide notes towards each other or making little offhanded comments, right? Because that's an attempt to relieve like the pressure that you're feeling of your passivity, right? And let a little bit of the anger out, which maybe that's better than blowing up and punching somebody. That's good. Please don't punch people, right? But like, it's not moving you towards healthy behaviors. It's moving you towards unhealthy behaviors, further and further into unhealthy, right? And so, next slide, please. I want us to get back in our groups for a second here. I'd love to hear if you guys have any good stories like that one, right? Do y'all have any good stories about times that you found yourself in a passive aggressive cycle where like somebody just kept it in long enough till they exploded? Maybe it was you, maybe it was a friend, maybe whatever. Or maybe you have a good passive aggressive story where somebody was being super like passive aggressive and leaving side comments like those terrible sticky notes all around my friend's apartment, right? Let's get into groups. Let's talk about it for a couple minutes. In all of these things, how many of these instances turned out well, right? Probably. I'm seeing shaking heads here. I assume I'd be seeing that online as well for those of you that with your cameras off now, you won't be outed, but I'm sure shaking your heads as well, right? Because this does not work, right? So what does work? Next slide, please. What I want to argue for is getting in the middle, right? Not being overly passive, not being overly aggressive, but finding yourself in the middle. And that's what we call assertive behavior, right? And assertive communication style takes into account balancing what your needs are with what the person you're speaking to's needs are, right? That's the quintessential definition of assertive behavior, right? And you share your thoughts, feelings, your needs in the moment with the other person's thoughts, feelings, and needs in the moment at mind as well, right? And instead of making demands, you make requests, right? And so, next slide, please. There are many different types of assertions. If Ashley could pass out the types of assertions handout. Again, for those of you that have joined late online, I apologize, our file transfer system's not working currently, but I will email all of these to you at the end of today's meeting. But there are many different types of assertions. One can be basic assertions. This goes back to the question Bella was asking before about the coworker that just keeps saying like, this, that, or the other thing, right? So a basic assertion could just be like somebody's interrupting you all the time and just basically say, excuse me, I'd like to finish, right? Excuse me, I was in the middle of speaking actually, right? You could also make confrontative assertions is another one that would apply to this thing that you talked about, right? You describe what happened, describe what the expectation was, describe what actually occurred, and express what you want in the future, right? I told you to complete the forms by November 15th and you agreed to do so. It's now January 15th and you're telling me you forgot them, but you still expect me to complete my business on time. What is it that you would like me to do in this situation, right? So you're in a business setting like that, or you showed up, you were supposed to be here at 2. You said you would be here at 2. It's 3:30. You're just clocking in for your shift now. What would you like me to do about the fact that I had to clock overtime, right? Because there was nobody here to mind the shop when you were not here, right? Some things along this lines. So again, there's a whole bunch of them here. I don't want to go through them all because this is like a front and back sheet, but one that I do want to highlight is I language. You maybe have heard of I language if you've ever gone to a couples therapy session or seen a couples therapy session on TV or watched a YouTube video on healthy communication. You'll have heard of I statements quite a bit, right? And they're if you don't master any of these other assertions, I statements are ones that you could really go for. So an I statement says, when you do blank, it affects me blank, and I feel blank, right? So when you don't take your turn doing the dishes, it affects me by I can't cook because there's gross dishes in the sink, right? And I feel frustrated, right? Therefore, I would like you to clean up your dishes when you use them so that I can use the kitchen as well, right? Or any other kind of discussion like this. But you are leading with your needs, right? This is the thing that happened, and it affected you. Their behavior affected you and made you feel some kind of way. And you would like to make the request that they stop making you feel that kind of way, right? These are basic I statements. Now, the important thing when we talk about this is to learn some of these things, yes, but I think even more so, if we really admitted it to ourselves, oftentimes we know how to properly have a communication with somebody, but we don't do it because it's really hard, or because we're really scared, or because we're really unsure, or any number of other emotional things, right? It's not necessarily the skill, which if it is the skill, please review this assertions handout, come talk to me if you need more help with that. I'd love to have a counseling meeting with you. But I really think that interpersonal effectiveness is a big one here. Christine, can you see if you can drag the PDF over to the screen? So I want us to read, these are 18 statements, cheerleading statements for interpersonal effectiveness. And as I read through these things, if you want to highlight them or you want to jot them down real quick, whatever it is, I want you to think about the ones that you need to hear, right? We could put it on your daily affirmations board or whatever. You could tape it up on your mirror, or you could say it to yourself every morning, or whatever you need to do, right? But these are statements, and some of these statements are going to jive with you and others are not, right? But there's a wide array of them. So think about the ones that you need to hear, that you need to remind yourself when you're stuck in a passive aggressive cycle, when you are struggling to activate those assertive behaviors to make a more healthy relationship. So number one, it's okay to want or need something from someone else. It's okay to do that. Number two, I have a choice to ask someone for what I want or need. I can stand it if I don't get what I want or need. I can be okay. The fact that someone says no to my request does not mean I shouldn't have asked for that in the first place. If I didn't get my objective, it doesn't mean I didn't go about it in a skillful way. This goes back to what you were saying, what if they just say no? Standing up for myself over small things can be just as important as big things are to others. I can insist on my rights and still be a good person. I sometimes have a right to assert myself, even if it's an inconvenience to other people. The fact that other people might not be assertive doesn't mean I shouldn't be. I can understand and validate another person and still ask for what I want. There's no law that says other people's opinions are more valid than mine. I may want to please people I care about, but I don't have to please them all the time. Giving is not the be all end all of life. It's important. I'm an important person in this world too. If I refuse to do someone a favor, It doesn't mean that I don't like them, and they will probably understand that too. I'm under no obligation to say yes to someone simply because they ask me for a favor. The fact that I say no to someone doesn't make me selfish. If I say no to someone and they get angry at me, that doesn't mean I should have said yes. And finally, I can still feel good about myself, even though someone else is annoying, right? So think about these. Which ones do you need to remember? Which ones do you need to say in the mirror to yourself, right? Which ones are going to help you overcome the individual hurdles that you have to engaging in assertive communication? Sound good?
It should be part of the 10 Commandments.
Right? Right. These are the 18 interpersonal commandments, right? I'm not God here. We got some good 10 commandments, but these would be like an appendix, you know? All right, let's go back to the slides. Next slide, please. So let's talk about conflict mediation. So got another couple of verses here. I want to give us some biblical information before I move us into our last bit of conflict management for the day. So we have two texts from Matthew here, actually. The first one is about how you approach some conflict, right? If a member of a church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. One-on-one, go approach them one-on-one. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you're not listened to, take one or two others along with you. Bring witnesses along as you confront them. If the member refuses to listen, tell it to the whole church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, cast them out. Let them be as a Gentile and a tax collector to you, right? Remove yourself from that relationship with that person, right? But you see, it's a pattern, right? And it starts with one-on-one, just face-to-face connection, right? And handling it in the most assertive and least explosive way possible, right? And then this one, I think it's another really important one whenever we approach conflict mediation. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eyes, but do not see the log in your own eye, right? It's hypocrisy, right? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly enough to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye, right? You can't be going and trying to assert your needs to somebody if you are not doing right, if you're being a hypocrite, if you're taking advantage of them or being unfair to them, right? That won't work out. That's not the way that healthy communication and a healthy relationship is built. So next slide, please. This refers to, especially that first one, if you've heard of minimally invasive procedures, like if somebody is going in for like a knee scope rather than just a knee replacement or something like that, or they do this in medicine all the time. They minimize an incision they make and they snake a camera or something like that, in order to reduce the trauma that the body feels when they do whatever medical procedure, right? That's the idea that I want you to bring into when we deal with conflicts, right? I want us to go in thinking, I want to be assertive and face things head on, just like the example you gave about the second date and this guy was being all crazy and you were like, nah, I'm not putting up with that, right? This is at an early stage in relationship, right? It's important to right away practice positive, assertive communication, healthy communication patterns, so that problems don't get so big and massive that they become very, very hard to conflict manage, mediate away, right? Okay, next slide, please. So when we approach a conflict, the one thing that I really want us to think about, in addition to this, be assertive from the get-go, approach one-on-one first, don't make it a bigger deal than it needs to be, right? Don't be a hypocrite about it. The big thing that trips a lot of people up is the difference between someone's position in an argument and someone's actual interest in an argument, right? So, somebody may be very emphatic that they need things to be done exactly a certain way, right? I need you to do X, Y, or Z, well, why do they need you to do that, right? It's because that's going to give them some kind of gain, right? But what if there was a different way to get to that gain, right? What if there's a person that, we can go back to roommate conflicts because that's one that comes up a lot, right? There's the neat freak in the apartment, and then there's the pig pen in the apartment, right? And the clean freak says, you know, I need you immediately every single time you use any dish, every single time you do anything, I need you to immediately clean it up, and I need us to vacuum every single night and make sure that everything is dusted and polished or whatever, right? You know, why does that person need that, right? Well, they probably need that because it causes them some kind of anxiety or something not to have that done, right? Probably having some kind of cleanliness to them promotes feelings of wellness, promotes feelings of peace, right? Whereas the person that's messy, right, probably thinks that, you know, I don't want to, you know, like do that all the time. Not because I want you to feel upset, right? But because to me, all these extra chores when I get home from a long day, right, you know, like I need to relax, I need to calm down. Doing all this extra stuff is all this extra work, and it makes me so angry to have to be pestered by these requests, like when it could be very easily taken care of, you know, the next day, or we don't need to vacuum every single night, right? You know, because those two people have two different interests, right? One person doesn't want to be overstressed by excess work, and the other person wants to be able to live in a space where they can feel calm and safe, right? Well, now we can reach a compromise, right? Because obviously those two positions will never reach each other. One person doesn't want to do any chores ever, the other person wants all chores done immediately, right? Those two things seem like they're at an impasse, right? But if we can recognize the underlying interest, which is one person feels overworked, the other person feels unsafe in a messy place, right? Now we can start feeling something out, right? Maybe we can like make some kind of compromise on what areas get cleaned, right? Maybe, you know, okay, the common spaces, like if it really matters that much to you or whatever, but then maybe my space, I'm not gonna be like all about that, you know, or maybe it's like, maybe we can agree that like you can be fine and feeling safe, like for a 24 or 48 hour period or something like that. It doesn't have to be every day that we vacuum or whatever it is, right? But if we see the underlying interest, we can start to form compromises on the interest. Whereas if you have two positions that are diametrically opposed, you might think there's no way to solve this, right? And so that's what the most important part of conflict management is finding out the interests and then making a way for those interests to collide. Next slide, please. So just some suggestions on how to do this. Set a time to talk in person, right? Again, one-on-one, whoever you're having a conflict with, don't just let it go. Don't just avoid them, right? Message them, set up a time to talk in person. And when I say set up a time to talk, I mean schedule it, right? I don't mean like wait till the next time they don't do the thing that you want them to do and then jump on them saying you didn't do the thing that I wanted you to do, right? Because that neither of you are prepared to have a conversation at that point. One person is feeling ambushed and defensive, the other person has been like lying in wait, like is ready to release all their anger, right? You know, you're not going to reach a good solution that way. You need to meet in a place where both of you can feel like you're established and ready to have this conversation. Be assertive, not aggressive, right? State your needs, but acknowledge their needs as well, right? This is not a I win situation. This is how can we win situation, right? Again, as I mentioned, work to identify interests, follow up again to make sure the resolution is working for both sides. That goes along with making sure the agreement reached is specific. There's one more handout I have for you guys. Again, I'll send this in email to all of you online, but this is a checklist for a good resolution. It says, is this specific enough? What exactly are we agreeing on? That way we can't go back later and say, I never said I would do that, or you said you would do that. No, I didn't, right? I don't want to have that argument, right? I want it down in writing, what everybody agreed to do. And then we need to check, right? Sometimes somebody will want to avoid conflict, want to be super passive in there, and just agree to all of the things, the demands that are being made. But then they create like an unrealistic expectation, right? If I go back to the messy roommate and the clean roommate thing, if the messy roommate just says, okay, yes, definitely, I will, do all of the, vacuum every square inch of this place every hour, right? Like, no, they're not going to do that. That inevitably won't work. There's just no way that that's realistically possible. And so if it's not realistic, then things are going to fail already, right? And so just because somebody agrees to something doesn't mean that agreement's going to work unless that agreement is reasonable for both sides, right? Finally, seek help from a neutral third party when available, right? Again, just like I said before with the Matthew text about go individually first, then bring along a couple witnesses, then et cetera, right? Be proactive in that stance and utilize external help. This is where I get to transition into a plug for the counseling center. So if you need to find somebody to talk with to help you figure out some conflict resolution stuff, if you need to find a third-party mediator, hey, counseling center exists. All of you are APU students. We'd love to have you. We do provide couples counseling. We also do, mediation stuff, and it's all free and all confidential for you, right? So give us a call. Our number is here, 626-815-2109. Yes,
Can
question?
I bring my mom?
Yeah, so in whatever relationship services that we provide, as long as one person is an APU student, then you're eligible for those services, right? And so we don't do a lot of parent-child stuff, but we do it, right? And so that would be definitely something to call us, and we'll set it up, Or, we also do a lot of partner stuff. We've done some parent-child stuff for folks that have their own kids and stuff like that. Again, these are not like our typical services, but we're happy to provide those services anyways. And if we can't provide a service to you, we're happy to make sure you get connected to somewhere that you can get that service and that it's somewhere that does take your insurance and is affordable, et cetera, kind of thing. So yeah, if you want to find us, if you don't know where we're basically as far that way as we could possibly be from this room, right? So if you know where the In-N-Out is across the street, we're basically on campus across the street from In-N-Out in the Shire Mods. This is Magnolia Court. Our office is here on the left side, the health center office here on the right side, if you know where the health center is. Basically, this is called Magnolia Court because there used to be a magnolia tree here, but then the magnolia tree died, so then they planted that little tree, but that little tree has died now, so if you go now, there's just going to be some shrubs in the middle, but our door will still be there with the University Counseling Center sign and a big automatic door warning sign on it. You'll be able to come in and talk to us whenever. All of our services are also available over phone and over Zoom for those of us that are commuters or for those of us that just don't wanna, we're all available that way as well. You can also follow us on Instagram if you're on Instagram. We have a team of interns that do all of our social media content, including healthy relationship stuff and other positive mental health stuff. So you should follow that. They're amazing at what they do. Next slide, please. So I want us to think today, what's one thing that you learned today that was new to you, one thing you didn't know about? Commit that to memory. And then it's Friday right now, we're going into the weekend. What's one thing from this workshop that you can practice? One assertive communication behavior, one interpersonal cheerleading statement that you need to remember, one thing about the relationship spectrum that we need to practice, right? Whatever it is, one thing to put into action, right? Because if you don't put this stuff into action, then it's kind of useless that you were here, right? Okay, I'll be happy to take any questions that you guys have. So either as a whole group or individually, but if you could skip forward a couple slides. We have one more of these workshops left. So next Friday, we'll have our last one on time management and goal setting. So if you want to show up for that, please do. Or if you want to attend online, because that is like the Friday as we're going into Thanksgiving break. So if you don't want to come here in person, that's fine. I will be here in person. Some of you, if you want to join us online, that's great.